Welcome to the English with Kirsty podcast from www.englishwithkirsty.com. Here I'll be sharing with you tips, information and other learning resources so that you can improve your business English. Hi everyone and welcome back to the English with Kirsty podcast. I have a special guest today, but I just wanted to make a couple of announcements first and to remind everybody that I am doing more events now. So if you want to find out about the events, the best way to do that is to sign up for the newsletter. So you can go to englishwithkirsty.com/podcast and there you can sign up for the newsletter. Or if you look for me on LinkedIn, then you'll see all the information about the events. So for anyone listening to this at the moment as it's going out, the next events that I have are the next interactive workshop is on the 30th of April. That's about 3 keys to success for language learners. So people who are working on their own, either alongside a course or independently to improve their language skills, things that you can do to make that language journey more enjoyable, more beneficial, more efficient. We'll be looking at that in the workshop. And then next month we also have our usual 2 meetings for the Conversation Club. So the one for freelancers and business owners is on the 21st of May and the one for general English is on the 29th of May. So I will announce events going forward, but the best way to find out about them is to either follow me on LinkedIn or to get the newsletter. So now I've done that, I'm going to continue with the interview that I recorded for this episode. Welcome back to the English with Kirsty podcast. And today our guest is someone else who enjoys podcasts and using podcasts to learn. So we're going to get into that as well, but also somebody who uses multiple languages in her job. So welcome, Olivia. It's great to have you here.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Yeah, hi. Let's find out something about you first. Tell us who you are, what you do, and why you're interested in languages.
Sure. So I'm Olivia Segal. I am an English language specialist. I tend to work with Spanish and Catalan-speaking organizations to kind of help them with all their content in English. So that could be through translation, editing, preparing speeches and presentations, and just all sorts of kind of areas related to language, really, and making their content a bit more native, if you will.
Okay, so you are you've been doing this for how long now? When did you set up your business?
So I am coming up for a year at the end of May, so about 10 months now.
Right. So before that, I know you had some experience. One of the things we're going to talk about today is your experience in using languages, working abroad, and kind of the difference between what you learn and how life actually is when you start using a language in a real context. So which other languages do you speak in addition to English, and where have you used them?
Yes. So sorry, I should have said before, English is my native language. And I've lived in Brazil, in the south of Brazil, and Barcelona in Spain. So the languages that I tend to work with at the moment are Spanish and Catalan. And then more recently, I'm trying to pick my Portuguese up again.
So when you were living in Brazil, were you working or were you studying?
So I was studying at that point. So I was there for about 6 months. And I think we've talked about this before, but I'm going to tell you anyway. That so when I studied at university, I studied Spanish and Portuguese in Bristol in the UK. And for anyone who doesn't know, when you study languages in the UK, you tend to spend your third year abroad. So I did half the year in Barcelona working and then half the year in Brazil studying. And all of my teachers at university were Portuguese from Portugal. Um, and so we'd been learning European Portuguese for about 2 years. And I remember all my teachers saying, you can't say this, you can't say that. And then the first thing that when I stepped off the plane in Brazil, that's exactly what people say. And so I just found the language very, very different. And there were maybe a few weeks when I was in Brazil where I didn't want to speak to anyone. I was
Mhm.
really shy.
I know this
And
feeling.
then and then because as well, I just found the vocabulary, the grammar, the accent so different from in Brazil, from so different from the Portuguese we've been learning that was kind of European Portuguese. And I'd had such little exposure to Brazilian Portuguese, I suppose, um, that I just didn't want to speak to anyone. But I was living with a Brazilian girl at the time, and she didn't speak English. So I thought, after about 3 weeks, I sat myself down and I thought, number one, I've come here to learn. So
Mhm.
even if I make mistakes, I've just got to do it. And number two, if I just, sit here and nod for the rest of my time here, then, we won't really get to know each other and we won't really be able to speak. So after a few weeks, I just decided, okay, whether I make mistakes or not, I've just got to, put myself out there a bit more. And it was an amazing experience, really. Just I think I'm sure we'll get onto this uh, a bit later, but I think for me, kind of immersing myself in the language and culture, speaking with native speakers has really been a way to learn languages.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And in a way, you were lucky because although it put more pressure on you there, for example, I'm not speaking Portuguese at the moment because I don't think my level is good enough, but also because the people that I know have a really good level, like one exceptionally good level, and but everyone else is good and much better than my Portuguese at the moment. But if I came across someone who didn't speak any English or German or Romanian, then maybe I would be a bit more courageous. So I think this
Mm,
position that you were put in there with this girl who didn't speak any English, um, that helped you. It may have felt like a
mm,
bigger challenge at the beginning, but at the same time, then I think it makes you fast track your getting over your being nervous because you know that that's the only way in which you're going to communicate with each other.
absolutely. Yeah, and actually, I've just returned from a 2 week trip in Brazil, which was my first time going back in 8 years. And well, I was surprised actually. My Portuguese was definitely rustier than I thought it was, but it was
Mm,
amazing how quickly you pick it up again. But I'd be, having kind of slow conversations with people in the streets or at the hotels or wherever, restaurants. And everyone would say, "Oh, your Portuguese is really good." And then I would think about it afterwards, and I would think, well, I think it's probably because many foreigners probably go to Brazil without speaking any Portuguese.
mm.
So it's probably the comparison, but I'll
Surprise
take
for
the
them,
compliment.
but it's
Thank
nice
you.
as well. And I think
Yeah,
it's
no,
usually better than we think it is. Sometimes we can be a bit hard on ourselves as well. Like, oh, I got that wrong, but
exactly.
other people were just happy that you communicated, they understood what you wanted to say, and that
Absolutely, yeah. And at the end of the day, they understood what I was trying to say, whether I said it perfectly or not. And that's the whole point of languages, isn't it? Is to be able to communicate. And there's definitely something about being able to communicate with people in their native language, which I think has always been kind of what spurred me on in a way. Because my first sort of interaction with Spanish was when I was at university was as an au pair in the Basque Country. And I remember my level of Spanish was quite low when I went there. Um, but then I just remember meeting people, and I was with a kind of a host family, and so they would introduce me to lots of people. And I would just ask so many questions of, how do you say this? How do you say that? Does it make sense? And I think just really being able to learn from people that way, speak to people in their own languages is just amazing, really. That's kind of the communication, the power of communication behind it.
and it also means you can speak with anyone. Then it means you don't have to rely on someone else's level of English. If that's your first language, you can also choose who you want to speak to in that country or
Hmm.
in that setting. And I think
Absolutely. Mm,
this makes it real. Like you can, it's really important to learn like formal education courses. That's really great, and I do it as well. But at the same time, there's something about bringing that into a real experience with real people talking about real things. And we touched a bit earlier before we started recording on language exchanges because for any of the listeners, I'm starting some monthly language exchange meetings for language professionals. But I know that language exchanges have really helped me. Maybe you could share something about that, like what kind of experiences you've had with either language, but working as a kind of language tandem, language exchange setup.
Yes, I think this is a conversation we've had many times, but I love talking about it. So yeah, I would say my experience with language exchanges probably started in my first or second year of university. And I remember actually going on language exchanges after I'd been to the Basque Country. So I was amazed actually I always talk about this, about how I learned maybe more in a month in the Basque Country than I did in, my first few years of learning Spanish. Especially because I find sometimes in the British education system, at least, the content can be quite repetitive and it's to pass an exam. Anyway, so after being in the Basque Country, I decided, if I've learnt so much in a month, I want to keep practicing. So at the time there were a lot of Spanish speakers living in Bristol, so it was excuse me, really easy to find language exchange partners, and the university had activities, and the Erasmus network, I think, as well had activities. So it was easy to find language partners. And so I remember meeting some people in London, some people in Bristol, and I guess it's an interesting way to get to know people, because you kind of realize that when when you're speaking in one language, you maybe have one personality, or certain things you find really interesting, and then you switch to another language, and that person can kind of seem like a completely different person. Especially when I think about at that time my Spanish maybe wasn't, as good as it is now. So there were certain things that I couldn't quite communicate. So then being able to uh, talk about them in English, and for the other person to be able to understand as well, and for us to learn together was just really exciting. And so I think the thing with language exchanges that I've always really liked is, compared to the classroom perhaps, is that you can ask all these maybe slightly strange questions of, how do you say this? How do you say that? Does this make sense? And it's all really while helping the other person, being able to explain maybe why you can't say something a certain way in your own language, but compare it to the other language. But yeah, even then, when I moved to Barcelona after finishing my undergraduate degree, um, I had met people here when I was on my year abroad, and then it was just a way to kind of keep up friendships, make new friends, and at the same time, like I say, being able to help someone improve their English while also improving my Spanish and Catalan.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it ends up not being an exchange. Like with one of my Romanian friends, we just never speak English anymore. It's just like, she's got other people that she can speak English with, and she knows I want to learn, and it just kind of gone that way. But with others, it's definitely helped me and helped them as well. I've been doing it for some time too, and they've all been different. And some people become friends and they stick around. Some people it's just about the exchange. I think it's good to find out what you need as well, because like I know it's a bit harder if you're a beginner to feel that you're not, boring the other person. I certainly felt like that at the beginning with Romanian, because I started straight away. Whereas with German, I already had like a decent level of German. I wanted to improve it, but I already had something there. But with Romanian, I started very early, and some of it was quite frustrating. I think maybe I would have done myself a favor if I'd waited a bit longer, but I did manage to find someone who needed something that I could offer her. And so it felt okay to need different things from the exchange. I guess ideally it's good if you're about the same level. But if you're not, it's also fine as long as you make sure that you don't just do what's comfortable and use the language that is more easy for communicating. Because I know that I've done that. It was easier to speak. Sometimes even when in my favor, it was easier to speak German, but then the other person didn't get so much time to practice English. So I guess that's something to be aware of if you're going to do it, just to make sure that it's kind of fair for both people. That doesn't mean you have to do the same, but it means that both people have to get something from it. Otherwise, it's not really fair.
Absolutely.
But yeah, they are great, and I guess that helps you when if you're living, like when you were working in Spain. I guess the more you can talk to people around you, the more you feel like you fit in, that you really use the experience for learning as well as just being there in this other country. Because I guess it would have been easy for you to find English speakers, but how did you do that? Did you make a decision not to find English speakers and to focus on your Spanish, or how did that go?
Yes, so when I came to Barcelona for my year abroad, I had started Catalan the year before. Um, and so that was kind of part of the reason, is having been in the Basque Country and seeing that you can be in a bilingual community and, still improve your Spanish while you're in my case, I was exposed a little bit to Basque, which is completely different, but still being able to improve my Spanish while I was there. Then I thought, well, if I go to Barcelona where they speak Spanish and Catalan, um, and I don't speak very much Catalan yet, or I didn't at the time. Um, but being able to go there and improve both and, kill two birds with one stone. Um, so that definitely influenced my decision. And then because I had two languages that I needed to improve, I definitely made the decision of, I've only got 6 months here. I could, meet lots of other people that speak English. But I really made the decision of I want to just immerse myself in the language, meet as many people, many native speakers as I can, to kind of really have a sort of authentic experience.
Mm.
And so I was working at a Spanish language school. So within the school hours, we would always speak Spanish. So that was great. Um, but then a lot of us were from different parts of Europe. So definitely outside of school, the language that we spoke and tended to be English. Um, but there were times as well when I just needed to speak English after speaking Spanish all day. So that was fine. Um, but definitely in the time that I did have outside of school, I didn't want to be speaking English all the time. I didn't really want to only hang out maybe with other Erasmus students or other English speakers. So yeah, I definitely did make the effort to just meet as many people as I could. And once you meet one or two people, then you just end up meeting more people who might be
Mm.
interested in maybe improving their English. I remember I had a friend that he was a from a town just outside of Barcelona, and I met him in London. And coincidentally, he'd come back to his town, I think just around when I'd gone on my year abroad. So then we went to a language exchange together, and then we met other people. And that was actually the first time, because it was me and four other Catalans. So the interesting thing is that we met up to speak Spanish and English, because at the time I couldn't really say more than, hi, how are you in Catalan. And I remember, so we'd all be speaking Spanish together, and then when they would communicate with each other, they would speak Catalan. I remember just thinking, oh, okay, well, I haven't learned very much then in the first year, because I couldn't really understand very much. But it's one of those things that I find fascinating. It still fascinates me, is how they could talk to me in Spanish and then, turn to the other person and speak Catalan. So that's something that I'm still really interested in. And even I still frequently visit Barcelona, and just seeing, the bilingual signage and hearing people maybe have conversations where they mix languages. It's amazing, really.
So did you then go on some kind of course, or was everything you learned about Catalan through your exposure to the language with the people that you were with? Or
So once I was here, I mean, it sounds like I was here for years, because I managed to do a lot of stuff in 6 months. But I did a course um, with uh, something to do with the government, or it's subsidized by the Catalan government. So I did a course initially, and I think that was maybe 2 months or something. And then after that, I decided that I would probably learn more with a private teacher. So I did private
mm.
classes. And that was amazing. Again, because you've got kind of the one-to-one experience and you can ask all the questions that you want. My only criticism, I guess, of the classes I did initially is that we were all non-native speakers, and the teacher kind of made us speak all the time without really us hearing him speak and, learning
Mm,
vocabulary from him. And at the time, we didn't have any vocabulary really
yeah.
to be having these conversations or to have so much emphasis on speaking. I mean, of course, speaking is really important, but we needed to listen to him maybe a bit more. So having these one-to-one classes really helped with my language learning because I could ask all the questions that I wanted to without worrying about, am I taking up too much time? You know what I mean? Um,
Yeah,
and
and I think that's something that does get ignored.
mm,
Perhaps in like the really old days, it was too far the other way. But now I've seen, like, for some people, there's like an overemphasis on speaking at the beginning, which I don't actually enjoy as a language
mm,
learner. So I have my Portuguese classes. My teacher only speaks Portuguese with me, but sometimes if I want to ask a question, it's more important I get the answer. So I do ask in English if I can't in Portuguese because it's more important to get the answer. But I've
mhm,
noticed that as a language learner, especially as an adult, because yeah, it's different when you're at school, but as an adult, I'm really an observer. Like I listen a lot. I read a lot. I just it doesn't it's helpful if I'm interested in the content, but sometimes it's just, like listening to people talking to find out how they do it, because I need to know that before I can. It's not just about how you put the sentences together in terms of grammar, because you can learn that, but in terms of what sounds good, what sounds normal, natural. I've noticed with Romanian, I listened a lot and then I started doing it, and
mm,
then it was like something switched, and then I thought, okay, I've heard enough now to be able to copy in a way that makes sense for me, not
mm,
copying their style, but doing it in my way, but knowing enough about what do people say in this situation, or how do people react. And I think sometimes if you try to make students speak too much at the beginning when they don't have vocabulary, well, yeah, you have to get used to listening to your own voice, but you also need to give them the input so that they can draw on that and learn it, and then use it for themselves.
absolutely. And that was another thing is that in these um in these other classes, the teacher never really corrected us, whereas in my one-to-one classes, my teacher would correct me and say, I see what you're trying to say, but why don't you say it this way?
Mm.
And that really helped, especially alongside the language exchanges. It really helped kind of figuring out how to stop translating maybe word for word from English and then thinking more in the other language, even if I still didn't have all the vocabulary to, have these full-on conversations, just to keep kind of making progress every time.
Yeah, I was talking with someone about, and I think I'm strange because I don't tend to translate, but then if I don't have the words, I just don't know. Like, usually I'll understand the question, but instead of like thinking, okay, how do I translate this from English into Portuguese, I
Mm.
can think about the answer straight away in Portuguese, or I just freeze, like I don't know, because I don't
Mm,
go through that translation process. And I
yeah.
think that's why it takes me longer sometimes. But then once I can start, like I've found the beginning of the sentence, and then sometimes I don't speak it until I know the end of the sentence, which isn't good, because but I don't want to get kind of stuck halfway through. But I think the more vocabulary you get, the more options you have in terms of, okay, I can't finish the sentence that way. Where can I go now? I'll take another direction and still get there. I think the more vocabulary you get, the easier it is to do that. But
True,
yeah,
true. And then you start to think of synonyms as well of,
mm,
okay, maybe I can't think of the exact word, but what's another way that I can say it or paraphrase? Hmm.
yeah, or just some like thing that, I was struggling with the word back legs for Romanian. I was like, the legs that are near the tail. I was talking about a dog, but it's like I didn't know back legs, but you can still say something and finish the sentence. But obviously as a beginner, it's harder to do that. But yeah, I think it's one of those things that I do think the beginning is the hardest, but once you get through that, then you can start having fun. And I guess now would be a good time to mention, we were talking about, building vocabulary and
Hmm.
helping yourself. And we've also talked about podcasts in the past. So maybe you
Yes.
could share a bit about your podcast journey or how they helped you.
Yeah, so in general, I would say I didn't really know what a podcast was until the pandemic, and then we had a bit more free time. So I started kind of listening to more podcasts, kind of even just in English, popular culture, news, that sort of thing. And then I discovered that, on Spotify, you can see what's trending, which podcasts are in the charts in different countries. So I started seeing different podcasts in Spanish, Catalan, um, and more recently, people podcasts in Brazilian Portuguese. So I got a few on my list to listen to there. Um, but I think the nice thing with podcasts is that you can find ones that are maybe there's one that I listen to regularly in Spanish that's kind of top news items of the day, and it tends to be maybe 5 to 6 minutes. So it can be a really short kind of burst of exposure
Mm,
to your source languages or the languages you're trying to learn, or you can listen to some that are maybe a bit more in depth, that might be maybe an hour long. And there really is there's a podcast on any subject. So, whatever sort of topics interest you, there is most likely a podcast on that topic. So I think just being able to kind of combine maybe being out and about, being on a walk, on a commute, and doing something that's productive, but without kind of traditionally studying. Um,
yeah.
but I think that's what I find useful about them. And just being able to learn new things. And like you, I kind of observe and pick up new things. And then sometimes, I might have to ask a native speaker, does this word mean what I think it means? Or sometimes I might have to ask someone about 5 times before it kind of sinks in, and then I can use it maybe the way they do. Um, but I just love the kind of the variety of topics and being able to learn new things all the time. And the kind of how, it's right there really in your pocket on your phone.
Yeah, you don't have to search for it. It's there. And I think that's a really good tip as well. I got that from you about, because if I look for Portuguese podcasts, for
Mm,
example, a lot that will come up are in Brazilian Portuguese, and that's not what I'm looking for.
mm,
But if you look for the country, like the top 100 in Portugal, you're probably going to get, well, you do get a bunch of English stuff in there as well. But it's for me, it's easier to find what I'm looking for. In the same way, if people are looking for, I don't know, English from Australia or something like that, if you look at what's trending in Australia, you're more likely to come across podcasts using Australian English. They won't be entirely, but I think it's a good way to kind of drill down either into a certain type of a language or it's easier to find what you're looking for sometimes, and also to discover new things, because things that are trending, maybe they are interesting for you, maybe they're not, but you'll find
mm,
new things, and then you can test them out, see if you like them, as well as having exposure to different voices. Because if you're working with a teacher, that's great, but you know how they speak, and my my students
mm,
know how I speak, but it's really important to have that exposure to lots of different voices, because in real life not everybody speaks the same, so it really is a different kind of listening skill, to be able to understand. Because I don't know how it was for you. I think I'm older than you, but at school, the language listening activities were very quite slow, very
mm.
clearly pronounced. And then you actually went to the country. I went to Germany, and I was, what did you say? It takes some time, so I think it's really good to have that from the beginning, to use real authentic voices, so you can understand that we're all different and we pronounce things in different ways.
Absolutely. And that makes me think actually that kind of the exposure of maybe what people are interested in the particular country at the moment also exposes you to the culture.
Mm.
So there might be certain topics that are a bit maybe taboo in certain cultures, but then others maybe talk about it more kind of openly.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it's just another way to be exposed to the language, the culture, without leaving your home country, really.
Yeah, this is the best time to be learning another language, I think, because a lot of what I did for my Romanian was in the pandemic time. We were in lockdown, we couldn't go anywhere
Mm.
anyway, even if I wanted to. But I had the internet, I had lots of people I could talk with online, I had resources, and I think now is the best time to be, because obviously if you do go and spend time in another country, it helps. But if you're not able to do that because of your life or other responsibilities, or job doesn't allow you to do that, then there's a lot that you can do without leaving your own town. And if you live somewhere like London, then you've got people from all around the world around you as well, so you can easily find a language exchange partner. But if you
True.
can also do it online. A lot of the people that I spend most of my time talking to are not in the town where I live, so
Yeah,
yeah.
but even platforms like LinkedIn, I would say. So I have a language exchange in Catalan and English with one of your previous guests, Marta Pagans. Um,
Okay.
and so, I mean, I've never met Marta in person, but I met her on LinkedIn, and it's just amazing to see in the maybe, I don't know how long it's been, less than a year than that I've known her, how much we've been able to help each other. So, for example, before she came on your podcast, when she talked about the power of saying no and how to say no, we had a little online meetup and kind of talked about. She did a sort of rehearsal, so. And we've been practicing Catalan since, which reminds me I need to send her a voice note in Catalan. Well, I'm in Barcelona at the moment, so I don't have an excuse because I am exposed to Catalan um, at the moment. So yeah, it's just amazing how you can, like you say, you can meet people online. It's nice to be able to meet people in person, but if you kind of take out your commute, you just kind of log on, talk on Zoom, log off. And so, it's just a lot easier, I'd say, maybe since the pandemic to fit things like that in, and especially with podcasts, you can kind of I obsess a bit about productivity. So I like to be able to do stuff on my commute if I'm going somewhere,
Mm.
or even just being out on a walk or cleaning, just being able to do
Cleaning's
multiple
boring. You
things
need
at
something to
once.
make it
Yeah,
bearable.
exactly. And then I just find myself thinking about what I'm listening to and not what I'm actually doing. So yeah, there are so many ways to be exposed to the language, I would say, the language you're trying to learn without without leaving your home if you wanted to.
Yeah, and I think LinkedIn is really good as well. I mean, I've been talking about this for a while now. All my podcast guests I found on LinkedIn, but I find it to be it's changed. I've had a LinkedIn account for years, and for years I didn't really do much with it. I maybe made content for other platforms and thought, oh, I've made it now, I'll stick it on LinkedIn. But nothing really happened because I wasn't
Mm,
really engaging. But maybe it's because I'm more involved with the translator community and other freelancers now. Then it's just a really nice vibe going there. And I think, if you can also find people who have similar interests to you, or maybe working in a similar field, or you already have something in common, and if you can find a language exchange, then it's more likely to work. Because sometimes, after the first, what did you do at the weekend? It's like, oh, well, now what are we going to talk about? But if you have topics that you're both interested in, it's much easier to keep the conversation going.
absolutely. Yes, and exactly, just being able to meet people that maybe you have something in common, maybe you have similar professions or you have languages in common. Absolutely. I mean, we met on LinkedIn
We
if I
did.
if I remember
Yeah, it was
correctly.
one of
So
the,
there's an amazing community on there
I think you
of
just
language
messaged me, didn't you?
professionals. Yes, I think I can't remember if you just sort of popped up on my timeline because we had maybe a mutual connection, or if someone recommended that I get in touch with you. I can't remember now, but I agree. I mean, I was the same in that definitely before maybe going through a career transition last year, when I worked in-house at a translation agency, I kind of thought LinkedIn was maybe an extension of my CV. But
Mm.
then I think going from being a sort of lurker to being a freelancer and having to be, not having to be, but choosing to be a lot more active on there. Um, there's so much there is a lot of power behind it. There are a lot of things that you can do. It might be finding clients, finding language exchange partners, finding out about events, meeting like-minded professionals. There's so much that you can do on there. Then it's really not just your CV.
Yeah, and you get what you put in. I guess if you just keep posting stuff and never interact with anyone, you're not going to have a good experience. But it's about the communication, about the relationships and friendships as well. Because I've definitely found friends there. I don't just see it as, I mean, I look at the weekend, because for me it's not just about business. It's also about, some people have become friends, and that's really nice as well. Because especially if you're working on your own, then it is nice to have that support as well. Not everyone has a wonderful day every day, so sometimes it's nice to have people with whom you can share that, and the good times as well, successes to share those. But yeah,
absolutely, and meet other people to be able to ask for advice, especially when you're self-employed and you don't have traditional colleagues. Then I've met, so many people on LinkedIn that have become kind of colleagues, if you will. So
yeah.
then you can ask for advice or share your experience and say, or maybe I would deal with this situation this way. What do you think? What would you do? Yeah, so there's so much that you can do on there. Absolutely.
Or even I can't say it, skill swaps. We were talking about
Yes,
language exchanges, but on
true.
LinkedIn there are people that I do, I swap something that I don't know how to do or I'm not very good at for something that they need help with. And yeah, it's just nice, because with colleagues you would do that naturally. So it's a way to kind of build your own set of colleagues with only people you like, which is something that you can't do if you're working for a company.
Exactly.
But yeah, you can choose nice colleagues to work with. So we like LinkedIn, we like language exchanges, we like podcasts. Is there
Yes.
anything else you want to share with people?
To do with languages. Good question. I guess, yeah, one thing that we were talking about earlier, is just to put yourself out there, really, in the sense that, you know, I was feeling really shy before going to Brazil recently about how my Portuguese would be, and think, gosh, people won't be able to understand me because I haven't practiced in so long, and all of that. But actually, once you just get going, you won't be able to stop. So I think just letting go of thinking, oh well, they're gonna think that I speak terribly, or they're not gonna understand. It's just, you won't know if you don't try.
Yeah. And often things aren't as bad as you think. We can tell ourselves stories about what things might be like. Or I remember this when I was going to some of the Romanian meetings where it wasn't exchange because I was the only non-Romanian speaker there, but I had all these stories that I told myself about how difficult it was going to be, and maybe I wouldn't understand someone, and maybe they'd ask me a question that I couldn't answer. But in actual fact, that didn't really happen. Yeah, it was hard at the beginning because we were talking about business stuff, but most of the terrible things that I thought were going to happen didn't happen, and they wouldn't have been terrible anyway. They were just the stories I was telling myself. So yeah,
Exactly.
try new
And it
things.
becomes almost addictive. When you learn all this new vocabulary and you can start to use it, then you won't want to stop.
And I do think sometimes it depends on who it is, and because one of the challenges I found with language exchanges, when I become friends with someone, I don't want to kind of, it's not a waste, but feel like I'm wasting our time together on me struggling to say something. So if you have some people that, not that you don't care about them, but that you aren't as close to them, or it is more of a functional language exchange setup, sometimes you can get through those initial stages of, I can't even explain this simple thing very well, with somebody who is also there to learn. So you're not taking their time, and it's not somebody that you really want to tell what happened last weekend because it's so exciting or whatever. You know what I mean? It's the
Yeah,
friendship is great sometimes, but sometimes it's also good to have people who it's more transactional, because then it's only about the language and not about your relationship with that individual, your friendship with that individual.
yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, so where can people find you? Is it LinkedIn? I think we've established
Yes.
that you both.
Yes, so I'm on LinkedIn. I'm also on Instagram at Olivia S English. And yeah, feel free to get in touch if you want to, maybe do a language exchange or just find out more about what I do or send any questions, then yeah, feel free to get in touch.
Great. I'll add those links to our interview, to the page with our interview and the information about you. And yeah, thanks for coming on the podcast. It's always good to chat about all things language and language learning. And I really enjoy that. So it's good to get a new perspective as well.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I love talking about languages, so I loved having the opportunity to talk
Yeah,
more about them.
me too. So have a great day and thanks for being on the podcast.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the English with Kirsty podcast. If you have any questions or comments, my email address is kirsty@englishwithkirsty.com, or you can go to www.englishwithkirsty.com/podcast, where you'll find information about the individual episodes.